What's up, Fight Freaks? It's the Combat Remix. Today we're going to be exploring an alternate reality in which BJ Penn never returns to the UFC after his departure due to contract disputes. This is a small segment I cleverly titled, What if BJ Penn never returned to the UFC after his departure due to contract disputes?
Follow me and ponder the question. What if?
Oh yeah, that's a way better title. I don't even have to change it for any of the other segments I already have planned. Okay, big kudos to my producer Scott. You are worth every penny, sir. But we should move along. After defeating Matt Hughes and winning the welterweight title at UFC 46, BJ Penn would soon after vacate the title after a contract dispute, leaving the UFC to fight for K1. But in just 2 short years, BJ Penn would return to fight at UFC 58, and go on to have many more fights in the organization until his retirement. But what if he didn't? What if Penn and the UFC could just never work out a deal? How would that affect the division, the history, and everything that's intertwined with BJ Penn? And I didn't even want to mention this, but I feel like it needs to be said, because there's probably a couple of you out there that are going to take this a little too far, and I want to remind you, this is all in good fun. This is just a cool topic to discuss. So just because you've seen the butterfly effect maybe one too many times, let's please not go down the rabbit hole of suggesting that BJ Penn no longer fighting in the UFC somehow means that now there's a super heavyweight division, and for some reason the UFC is now owned by Lithuania. Can we please steer clear of that nonsense? Great, much appreciated. Now, in terms of legacy, you'd have to remove Penn from the list of 2 weight class champions. This would make Conor McGregor the second man to hold titles in 2 different weight classes, and everybody else on the list would just move up a spot. The welterweight division really wouldn't be affected all that much when you think about it. George St. Pierre was pleading with the UFC to fight Matt Hughes, who had reclaimed the title and was the current champion, but instead they gave him BJ Penn, a fight he won. GSP's very next fight ended up being against Matt Hughes anyway. He had already beaten BJ Penn. Now, yes, injury did force him out of UFC 63, which allowed Penn to step in. But if Penn's not there, I think the fight happens anyway, even if you have to delay it. So, again, not really a whole lot of change. The champions still end up being the same people. Even if we go way down the timeline when BJ Penn rematches GSP as the lightweight champion, well, that's not going to change either. Now, in terms of the lightweight championship, this does change a few things. Now, before we get to any of the fights, we have to address The Ultimate Fighter Season 5. I mean, after all, he was one of the coaches, opposite of Jens Pulver. This tough season spawned the likes of Nate Diaz and Gray Maynard. I mean, we're talking fighters who are future title contenders. So I'm sure we all can give examples on how any changes to this tough season could have real impacts. But for the most part, I'm hand-waving all these away. Mainly because I'm fairly confident that the contract was already in place for Season 5. Now, whether or not it's delayed a little bit, or they get different coaches, or they just replace BJ Penn, I'm pretty sure everything's going to play out the exact same way.
I need a replacement coach on The Ultimate Fighter. I don't care who at this point, I just need someone.
Dana,
I'll even take 10% less than these other guys.
Obviously, this fight isn't happening, so I pondered every alternative plan the UFC may consider. But regardless of which one they enact, it turns out the historical changes to the division are more than likely going to be much less than what I originally anticipated. Whether the UFC decides to keep Jens Pulver on as a tough coach, or they just get 2 new ranked lightweights to take over, the fact remains, with BJ Penn gone, we're still going to have a brand new champion. Well, more than likely, I'm nearly positive that if Jens Pulver stays on as a coach, he isn't winning against any of his potential opponents. Whoever ends up victorious at the end of that could still headline UFC 80 for the vacant belt, because I'm sure many of you remember Sean Shirk, the UFC lightweight champion at the time, was stripped of the title after failing his drug test. So due to the suspension and the appeals, Shirk was out of the octagon for nearly a year. And he did come back for a title fight against BJ Penn, but as we already know, Penn retained the belt. So now the big question is, who will Sean Shirk be facing, and does it make a difference? I'm boldly going to say no. I think Shirk will get his belt back regardless of who the champ is at that time. Doesn't matter if it's Joe Stevenson, Tyson Griffin, Roger Huerta, or Clay Guida. Shirk was most likely beating them all. Just maybe I could see Kenny Florian winning a rematch. However, Shirk beat Florian roughly 19 months prior at UFC 64.
So I kind of doubt the UFC would be picking him as a tough coach, trying to put him back in the title picture so soon. Well, at least not at that specific time when the UFC was pushing other fighters that looked like good prospects. But theoretically, the two should still rematch at or around UFC 101. And this is where I'd probably pick Florian to beat Shirk. At the time, Florian was widely seen as the second best UFC lightweight next to BJ Penn. Certainly possible Shirk could retain the belt, but I think we'll see yet another new champ. Which now makes two new UFC champs for the history books. Kenny Florian and whomever ends up winning the previously vacant title. Screw it, let's just say it's Joe Stevenson. However, there may be three because Florian's first title defense should be Diego Sanchez. This fight would be a rematch, albeit at a different weight class, but I can see that fight going either way. So whether Florian retains the belt or Diego Sanchez becomes the champ, I don't see any other historical changes happening for one reason. But before we get to what that reason is, I'd be remiss not to mention our sponsor, Rogue Energy. Sick of energy drinks with crappy flavors and heavy carbonation? Try Rogue Energy. With over a dozen flavors to choose from, it's a great tasting, easy to drink brand that gives you that extra boost of energy and focus without all the overly carbonated part that comes with so many other brands. I'll be doing a full video review on their flavors in the near future, so be on the lookout for that. The link is in the description, and be sure to use promo code FIX for 10% off your order. So the reason all the changes would end with either Florian or Sanchez is because the next challenger would be Frankie Edgar. Not saying it's impossible, but I'm not picking either of them to retain the title in a fight against Edgar. So then everything in the division plays out like normal. A hypothetical fight between Florian and Sanchez or either of them versus Edgar might make for a good video. Also, I'd like to hear any ideas you have for future MMA What If videos. Appreciate everybody watching, and Remix will return to bring all his fight freaks their MMA fix.